Vi skal være litt effektive, rett og slett fordi dagens første samtaledeltaker skal straks videre til et annet arrangement, så vi skal være veldig lykkelige for å få lov til å låne den i 20 minutter. Jeg heter Ingeborg Woland, jeg sitter i styret i Norsk Penn. Når jeg ikke gjør det, så er jeg direktør i Bokklubben. Og så sitter jeg i Penns utvalg for litteratur og kunst, og det er vi som har fått lov til å eie den faglige delen av årsmøtet i år. Det setter vi stor pris på. Og for å sette scenen så har jeg faktisk da, litt i Kjersti Løken Stavrums ånd, lyst til å sitere fra Penns charter. Også kalt Penns charter punkt 2, som sier at under alle forhold, og spesielt i krigstid, må kunstverk, menneskehetens åndsverk i vid forstand, ikke utsettes for nasjonalt eller politisk press. Og det vi skal finne ut litt av i dag er hvordan skjer det presset i praksis? Hvordan fungerer litteratur og kunst under diktatur og stadig mer autoritære styresett? Det blir et tredelt program, hvor vi starter, og det er litt av praktiske hensyn, vi starter med en samtale med en mann dere straks skal få møte, om situasjonen og litteraturen i Iran. Deretter kommer et utdrag fra et videointervju med den russiske forfatteren Sergej Lebedev, som var i Norge for 2-3 uker siden, og hvor vi var heldige til å få litt tid med han og diskutere det da. Han kunne ikke komme tilbake i dag, så vi valgte å gjøre det på den måten. Og så til slutt, fra det mer akademiske perspektivet, så har vi med oss Andrej Rogatschevskij, som er professor i russisk litteratur og kultur ved Universitetet i Tromsø, og har fått studere over tid hvordan kunst og litteratur endrer seg, og hva slags kunst og litteratur man produserer i et stadig mer autoritært regime. Og så kommer samtalene til å skje på engelsk. Hvis noen har behov for at jeg skal oversette noen ting underveis, så vink litt, så skal jeg prøve å gjøre det. But we'll start by switching into English right now, and we'll start by discussing the most established of the dictatorships we'll be discussing here today, Iran. And I'm very pleased to be joined by Behrouz Boochani, if you'd like to join me on stage. Have a seat. And very briefly, for those who don't know you, the sort of boilerplate introduction says you're a human rights defender, writer, and a film producer, born and raised in Iran, but currently living in New Zealand. And your story about how you ended up in New Zealand and your life as a refugee is what you'll be discussing downstairs in about half an hour. So we won't be dwelling on that. But would you very briefly tell the audience a little bit about who you are and how you ended up leaving Iran?
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for having me. It was a very long journey that I came to Norway. Glad to be here. My name is Behrouz Boochani, and I'm from Kurdistan in west of Iran. I left Iran on May 2013, and mostly because of my cultural activities. And then I ended up in Manus Island. They sent me to Manus Island, but it's quite interesting because I look at Iran as with a country with a history of colonialization. And I ended up in Australia, and I saw that actually that policy towards refugees, to banish refugees to Manus Island and Nauru in Pacific Ocean, is based of colonialism mentality.
So there are some similarities.
Yeah, very similar, and that's why always I say that I borrow Kurdish resistance knowledge and reproduce it in Manus Island. So against another colonialist system.
Yeah.
And then so I finally ended up in New Zealand. Yeah.
And when you started out in Iran, you were a journalist and writer.
It's quite difficult because the context of Kurdistan is very different with other part of Iran, because the Kurdish language is not an official language in Iran, and we have so much struggle to keep the language, especially in that part of Kurdistan that I come from, to keep the language alive. So people like me, we used to do many things, you know, just to keep the language and the culture and the identity alive and fight that assimilation process. So, yeah, I was working as a journalist for a while, but mostly I know myself as a cultural activist, you know. Yeah. So then I had to leave.
And you were born in the early 1980s, so it's a very short time after the revolution in Iran in '79. And I've heard you describe yourself as a child of the war.
Yeah, I say that I'm the son of war, because I was born in 1983, and that was in the middle of the war between Iran and Iraq. I should refer to a quote by Kurdish novelist Shirzad Hassan. Shirzad Hassan described it very beautifully. He wrote that Kurdistan is like a garden, and the neighbor elephant, when they want to fight each other, they fight on our garden. So the garden is destroyed. And even when they make love, still they do it on our garden. So in both sides, you know, that impact on us. So I was born in the middle of that war. And that's why I say I'm a son of war. Yeah. So then I raised in.
Yeah. And when you were working in Iran, you worked as an activist for the Kurdish language inside of Iran, and you were able to write and publish, at least to some extent. Because I think for a lot of us in Norway, when we think about literature or culture or the arts on the inside of autocratic countries, we think there isn't any cultural expression. We think there is no literature. We think everything is banned. But what was it actually like?
Yeah, that is a wrong image, actually, because in like a dictatorship system like Iran, still artists and writers find their way to write, to publish. But of course, there is a censorship system. But still, you know, I can say that most of the Western literature that I read and I learned was mostly through Persian language. So when the books published in the West, in a very short time, they translated to Persian, to Farsi in Iran. So, I mean, the literature has a big history in that region. So, of course, the official language in Iran is Persian. So everything is about Persian, but that doesn't mean that. So I look at Persian as like a language to dominate my language, but that doesn't mean that I ignore the history of Persian literature. Still, I think the modern literature in Iran is big writers. You know, they published a lot, and but recently, after the revolution in 1979, we have a kind of exile literature, that the writers who escape, they go to mostly West, to North America, to Europe, and they continue to work. And that is a different category of literature, but there's still many writers inside Iran published. It's quite interesting. I read a book by Italo Calvino, and he said that he said, oh, this book that you are reading now, So he described that you reader, you can be anywhere that you read this, even if you are on a horse, you are riding a horse, you read it. But I say that actually the writers inside Iran, they are not only on a horse and reading. They are on a horse, riding the horse, and they are writing. So it's very different, you know?
Yeah, and there are things you can do and there are things you cannot.
Yeah. But there is a long history of literature, and the poetry especially is powerful. It's a big genre. But in terms of novel and other, literature platform and medium, still people write. For example, last year, it was last year, one of the Iranian writer, Shukufeh Azar, her book was shortlisted for what is the name of the prize? I forgot.
The Booker Prize?
Yeah, the Booker Prize. Yeah, it was shortlisted, so it was about to win it. But winning awards is not we cannot really use that to judge about the literature, because that literature should be translated to mostly English.
Yeah.
And then they can, nominate. But there are many writers who write, and I think, most of the books in the West translate to Farsi.
Are a lot of changes made to the Western books, or are they published without any censorship at all to the people in Iran?
They do censorship. But still, many writers, they force them to accept it because there is not another platform. And that is not only literature. In cinema, that happened a lot. Even, watching football, they censor it sometimes. Yeah, when they show the woman on the audience, they just So, but there is an image about that some writers and some artists, they believe that in a dictatorship system like Iran, the writers and artists become more creative to write and create in a way to just pass that censorship system. But I'm not agree with that, because that impact on you. When you write, you are not free.
Yeah. So it doesn't feel honest?
Yeah. You are not honest, and you think about the censorship. So that means already in your mind, you censored your work. Mm-hmm. And you are afraid of using some particular words. Yeah. So that's happened. So I'm not agree with that. Yeah.
And the readers of the literature inside Iran, to what extent do they think about the fact that the books they are reading, are they aware that there are things that they could be reading that they aren't allowed to? And do they know? Or do you stop thinking about it? I mean, it's been a dictatorship and censorship going on for more than 40 years. Do you get used to it as a population?
I think that was a very good point you mentioned. The readers stop thinking about it.
They stop caring?
Yeah, they just read it. So they don't want to read through the lines and sentences to know that is censorship. Yeah, but that is...
because I think those are two different sort of topics for discussion. What you are able to express as a writer and what you consume or feel as a reader or a watcher of movies or a listener of music.
People are aware of it, definitely.
So you told me, I mean, you left Iran in 2013? Will you tell us briefly what made you leave?
So I was working in Elam. So Elam is a city in Kurdistan. So always I say that Iran is a dictatorship system, but in Kurdistan is worse. So we have a different kind of dictatorship.
Yeah.
So of course it's a dictatorship for everyone, but in that part in Kurdistan is worse. So they, in different layers, we see that they oppress Kurdish people. So in that part of Kurdistan that I come from, we have a more like a problem with like assimilation. So as an identity, and Kurdish identity is so important. So I was working there as a like cultural activist mostly. So we used to sometimes at Nowruz, which is a New Year, to bring people together, the community, that people dance, have a Kurdish dance, people get together, people read poetry. So for example, that was a part of the work that I was participating. And we published a magazine called Weria. That Weria, we published it just I think 2 or 3 times. Then they banned it.
Uh-huh.
And they arrested some of my colleagues. And that's why I realized that I should leave. Yeah, because I thought that if I leave, so it is in the age of internet, so I can do better out of Iran. So that's why I left. Yeah.
Yeah. And your experiences as a refugee is what you'll be telling downstairs afterwards. So I would suggest that if you have the time, you go downstairs after and hear that story. But you told me about your, I mean, because after you left and after you were in Australia, or rather on the Manus Island, you became a writer and published internationally yourself. And then you became published in Iran.
Yeah, actually, I was a writer before I left.
Yeah.
So I think being a writer is not necessary that you publish something.
Mm-hmm.
Being a writer is that moment that you declare that you are a writer to yourself. Mm-hmm. So you accept that you are a writer. Yeah, so it's possible that you write a lot and publish like after 10 years.
Yeah.
So when my book published in Australia and won some awards in Australia, and that became like a very big news. It was like a global news. And on that time, the book, many publishers approached my agent to publish it, and it published in Norway as well. So on that time, I was dealing with at least 20 publishers around the world. And also, I was under too much pressure from Iranian people. And they say that we want to read this book. And they put so much pressure on me. They said, we're proud of this. It's a big achievement, and we want to read it. So it was like a big hunger. And on that circumstances, I was quite, I felt too much pressure, and I couldn't make a good decision or wait. And then finally, some publisher approached me, and I just rejected them. And finally, I said, okay. So the book published in Iran, it was censored, some part of it. But after like 1 month or 40 days, they banned it. So they collected it from the market. So,
do you know what it was about the book that made them actually ban it?
Yeah. The publisher told me, it's very interesting. The publisher told me that in the book, you talk about being a leader and who can be a leader. and that's why they were not happy about that. But I don't think that was the reason. Just the book was really had a big reaction among people. People will keep buying it, and they just
So they took some little excuse.
Yeah. Always there is an excuse. Yeah.
Because even after 40 years of democracy, dictatorship.
I should say dictatorship.
Autocracy.
Before
there was a dictatorship even before. So there's been an ongoing dictatorship. You're quite right. But even after 40 years since the revolution, 40 years of censorship, and they still think they need a reason to take a book away from the market. Or at least they need to make an excuse.
Of course, in some cases probably not, but in that case, because I just published one book in Iran. So probably other writers have different experience.
I wish we could keep talking, but you have another speech to give, so I'm afraid we're going to have to give you a big round of applause. And
thank you very much.
Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you.
Baruch Butani, everyone. They will help you get your microphone off here at the side. Sånn. Og jeg synes det er veldig interessant å høre hvordan det oppleves, hva slags litteratur og hvilken posisjon litteratur fortsatt har i Iran og Irans samfunnsliv etter 40 år med prestestyret. Vi skal bare la de gå ut og få av med mikrofonen før jeg introduserer det neste. Fabelaktig. Det er veldig fint å ikke ta med seg mikrofonen, nemlig, når man går av scenen. Det har jeg gjort. Det er dumt. I en ideell verden så hadde jeg byttet om på dette innslaget og det som kommer nå. Rett og slett fordi det vi har hørt nå, historier fra innsida av et veldig etablert diktatur og et veldig etablert sensurstyre. Mens Russland er et land som har utviklet seg veldig raskt de siste 20 årene. Og for 2 uker siden så var jeg heldig nok til å få møte Sergej Lebedev, og vi filmet det intervjuet. Og vi skal vise et utdrag fra det intervjuet. Det tar cirka et kvarter. Hele intervjuet ligger ute på Pens YouTube-kanal, så det går an å få se hele. Jeg vil egentlig anbefale det. Jeg kan også, siden det sitter noen forleggere i salen, så kan jeg si at Lebedevs bøker foreløpig ikke forekommer på norsk. Det burde de, for nå har jeg lest flere av dem. Så William, du kan jo ta det med deg. Og for så vidt jeg så flere forleggere her. Dette er et ønske fra meg etter å ha lest disse bøkene. Det hadde vært et glimrende tilskudd også på norsk. Men vi fikk en samtale om hva som skjer med litteraturen og hva slags litteratur som utgis i Russland. Og jeg skal bare gi bittelitt ramme for inngangen til dette. For jeg har akkurat konfrontert på det klippet vi går inn i, så har jeg konfrontert Sergej Lebedev med at New York Times nå omtaler han som en representant, den fremste representanten for den nye generasjonen russiske forfattere. Så jeg tenker vi kan ta det derfra. Skal vi se, får vi til å trykke play? Skal vi se, du har den der? Ja.
Literature, which was written. Actually, it feels good as a phrase, but I suppose there is no generation. And this is the problem, because for me, the literature which was written in the last 30 years in Russia has one major flaw. This literature mainly lost the contact with the reality, I mean the political reality. When you see the Russia as it is, I mean politically, and when you see the literature written in the same moment, it's like 2 different countries. And this is the huge problem, because traditionally, I mean, the great Russian literature of 19th century was always very sensitive to what's going on in the country.
So you get a sort of false literature. It's not actually getting into what's actually in people's minds and heads and lives.
It's not false. I mean, again, here comes the question of freedom of art. It exists. Yeah, but when everybody claims the freedom of art, and nobody actually, except very few names like Vladimir Sorokin, are observing precisely what's going on inside the country. It's not false literature, but it's misleading literature. Once upon a time, I found, and this finding changed my life, that the second husband of my grandmother was, let's say, on the opposite side. He was the high commander in the Gulag system. And to know that you are, I mean, not by blood, but still, you're a grandson of the perpetrator, was quite a harsh feeling. And I understood that there is no way out here. All the witnesses are gone. You cannot speak with him or those who knew him. It's a sort of a trap. And to find a way out of the trap and to maybe offer some others the way to deal with such a past. And then I understood, okay, I should write a novel. And then my geological experiences in these abandoned Gulag sites also played a significant role. I understood why I experienced this. I knew what sort of abandoned kingdom is there on the north. And
this sort of became your first novel, Oblivion.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. This is exactly my first novel. Yeah. The Edge of Oblivion in
The
Russian.
Edge of Oblivion, yeah. And reading both that and one of your other books, Goose Fritz, I get this feeling, I mean, you're born around 1980, your grandparents' generation lived at the end of the revolution, they lived through the Stalin era, and they've lived through the Cold War, and also, of course, World War II. I get this impression of people of yours and my generation always having this feeling that there's something that you don't know about your grandparents, but that it might not be good.
Exactly. I remember this feeling being a kid, a Soviet kid. On the surface, everything was explained, everything was very clear, but beneath, you really, as a kid, you felt yourself a very strange detective, looking for something. You actually don't know what are you looking for. And for example, when my parents and their friends were gathering for some festivities, all geologists. Once in a moment they asked children, may you go and play your funny games in the room nearby. And then I understood that they are talking about something eerie and strange. But how to locate this, where to place this object or whatsoever on the map, you never knew. It was only this constant anxiety of understanding that something is deeply wrong. As, for example, you know, in the photo in the family album, there were certain photos of some relatives. But when you ask, who is this? And they said, you know, it's just somebody. And you got used to the fact that some people can be just excluded from the life. And where they're, what happened, nobody knows, or nobody will tell you.
So there's always this feeling of mystery and loss and something unexplained.
And lie.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But yeah, because you said in an interview with The Guardian at some point that an important person is missing from the Russian historical record. It's the figure of the evildoer. Could you elaborate a little bit on that?
Okay. Yeah, I will mix here, you know, the legislature, the juridical things and the cultural things. But if to offer the general formula for the Russian 20th century or Soviet 20th century, we can rephrase Dostoevsky's novel, and it will be Crime Without Punishment. We have millions of victims, and even the state accepted, or even the state says yes, there are victims, there are juridical victims. What sort of a crime was committed against them? Here is very vague notion of repressions whatsoever. And who did this? And the great emptiness is on this side. It can be Stalin, it can be some strange Stalin's henchmen, but juridically and culturally, nobody cares this burden of responsibility. And the very question of responsibility, again, as a cultural phenomenon, was never properly raised. I mean, this Hamletian question, what happened with my father? Why this spirit is haunting us? This Hamletian question was never raised, and therefore this figure is missing.
And all your books have been published in Russia and in Russian. What do they cause any sort of debate?
They usually cause the sort of non-debating avoidance, which proves that it's important.
Yeah, when you say non-debating avoidance, what would you say? Would you please explain?
I mean, okay, the normal way of reviewing my books is to say, okay, this guy is writing them for the Western audience. Ah. It's not for us. So
there's this whole debate that you don't go into. Yeah, it's sort of understood that there's something here, but we don't talk about it. Yeah.
But now it changes.
Tell me about that.
Okay, I mean, I was always too radical. I was always viewed as too radical in my public talks. But now, after the war started, maybe people realized that I was not so much provocative. Maybe I was just right.
Yeah, because you've been quite a vocal critic of both the Putin regime and also the lack of public debate on difficult issues in Russian society for a long time.
Yes.
But you say that people sort of just didn't go into that debate, but now something is changing to the worse.
No, I mean,
after the war in Ukraine?
Actually, it was, let's say, it was quite a popular position to describe Russia as autocracy. There are a lot of autocracies in the world. Okay, maybe a little bit off track, but still moving in the right direction. And Putin as the only figure responsible for misdeeds and wrongdoings. It was a very good formula. It offered certain freedom of life, action, relations. So nobody wanted to cry wolves. Nobody wanted to be this person to attract too much attention and to blame Russia for being really authoritarian state. But now, yes, we see that it was necessary to cry the wolves, because the wolves are there.
So what kind of literature and what kind of public debate do the people in Russia get today?
Okay, there is no public debate as it is. It's clear, or at least it uses very sophisticated eyes-open language, and there will be a lot of cultural events not politically related. It's like substitutions for what could have been there, but not possible anymore. But literature is being published. There are several examples of direct censorship, and people are proclaimed to be the so-called foreign agents. And then the book-selling networks receive an order to mark them as a foreign agents or to remove these books. But actually sometimes it's just a necessary advertisement, because people rush to buy the book.
So being labeled a foreign agent might actually help your sales?
Yeah, but of course it's, first of all, it's rather precarious and dangerous feeling to be. And for many, many years, actually, the literary field was not so much surveyed by the authorities. There are certain things related to the very strict laws on so-called homosexual propaganda. Yes, they are, because our state is very obsessed with people's bodies. So this is really affecting the book market, because people are trying to find and think this, just the scenes in the books, which means that they should be censored or removed whatsoever. Politically, yes, there were several cases of, but it was not state persecution, it was mobbing. Yeah. From the, let's say, auxiliary structures of the state, as it happened with Sorokin and Dulitske, for example. But mostly problems are coming when the author is going vocal, when he or she writes to the press. And it's not related to what is the essence of the books themselves. It's more about the public position. And of course, non-fiction, as we know, can be really dangerous thing.
So if I understand you correctly, as an author, you could get away with quite a lot as long as it's a literary work, yes, and it's the book in itself. But if you were to write non-fiction, or if you were to become a vocal participant in public debate, or try to raise issues through the media or whatever, then you might actually have a personal problem.
Yes,
yeah,
exactly. I mean, probably they're not really reading. The big book is a challenge. You need to go through it. Probably again, it's a shift of the paradigm, because of course the Soviets were obsessed with the word. They founded the empire on the word. They were the people of the writing themselves. While this culture, this political culture, is based on images, is based on the television set, and books are, okay, they're secondary in this system. They do not believe that some sort of, archipelago, gulago second will appear and undermine this new empire. No. And actually, I think here is a chance, because literature always wins in the long run. Here is the chance, and I can predict that in the coming years, more and more people will come back to this very natural process of lonely writing, because this is the very personal and always available way to resist.
Let's see if we could get maybe the lights back on, and I'll be joined on stage by Professor Andrzej Rogaczewski, so if you could give him a round of applause, that'd be nice.
Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah. So we've heard from an activist, and we've heard from a writer himself, and here comes the academic alibi. And you can actually take this because you'll be showing some slides in a little bit, but tell us just a little bit about yourself, because believe it or not, you're a professor of Russian language and culture and literature living in Tromsø.
The border is very close. So things Russian are more popular up north than perhaps down here.
Yeah, so tell us just a little bit about how, both how you chose your field of study. I mean, you're born and raised in Russia, right?
Yes.
Yes.
In Siberia, in Novosibirsk, I studied in Moscow and left Russia in 1993. Continued my studies as a Slavist. I also have a couple of other Slavonic languages in Glasgow. That's where my Scottish accent comes from.
You have this wonderful Russian-Scottish hybrid accent. Yeah.
Thank you. I hope it's a compliment.
It is. It is. Yeah.
In Scotland, I would be outed as a fraud. Yeah. And I worked there in Glasgow for 20 years. Then the professorship at Tromsø came up. I applied for it and I got it. And I've been in Tromsø for 10 years now. So 30 years away from Russia proper. But still interested.
Yeah, I'm absolutely certain. I mean, we've talked beforehand, and your view on, or what should I say, you've been watching Russia from the outside for 30 years. How would you, in its purest sense, say it's different today than it was when you left 30 years ago?
I wasn't running from Putin. Putin had been a non-entity back then. I was running from Yeltsin. Even that was bad enough for me. With Russia, as a long-term observer, an insider-outsider, I'd say if you take a worst-case scenario, and say this is what's going to happen, you probably won't be far off the mark, but it'll take time before it truly reveals itself. And in a totally unexpected dimension, part of my family is Ukrainian, part of my family is Jewish. Now Russians are kind of fighting Ukraine, and that's not what I would imagine in my wildest dreams. But I'm really happy that I left 30 years ago and I have no responsibility for what's going on. Because I know that many Russians do have this responsibility. That it's somehow their fault that Russia attacked Ukraine.
Yeah, I was thinking as I watched the clip of Lebedev again, and also speaking with Berus Butani earlier, that I think, well, to some of us who have been used to looking at the Russian or Iranian literary or cultural scene sort of as a hands-off kind of thing, them showing up here and knowing it's streamed, it's live, there's video, it's on YouTube, in my imagination they are being kind of brave. Am I right?
Oh yeah?
Yeah.
But obviously the bravest are the ones that still hold this position and are trying to be vocal about it in the countries where, those people who haven't emigrated, but they're still there. It's much, much harder and, with more personal consequences, perhaps, for them.
Yeah, because Sergei Lebedev, who you just saw, he is living in Germany now, also not having fled. There's a professional reason of his wife getting a job. But still, you've been watching the Russian literary scene and the cultural scene. You've also followed popular music very closely for many years. What do you think about what people in Russia are consuming in terms of literature and popular culture today?
That's a generational thing, because I think the older generation, they mostly watch television and what comes with it, and it's not like they're watching a specific program on a specific day at a time of the day. It's constantly on for hours. It's like a presence in a room of a different person. And then even just subconsciously, if you ever tried learning foreign languages while you're asleep, you probably won't be able to speak, but something will remain inside your subconscious, and that's what I think is happening to the older generation mostly. The younger generation, shall we say, up until 45, 50 maybe. So they're not that young, but they certainly.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, but they're certainly younger than the ones who watch television all the time. These people get their news from the internet, which is blocked right, left, and center in the Russian Federation at the moment. But they have VPNs, and they can obviously find ways of getting alternative sources of information. So obviously the first group consumes what another dimension, of course, is social, because the more privileged people who have access to internet all the time, Moscow, St. Petersburg, maybe Novosibirsk, the third largest city in Russia, my home city, they have more opportunities. Those in the villages and smaller towns, they're also not so well informed, I would say, don't have a full picture. So that's the consumption. The overwhelming mass gets what the government wants them to know, and the minority, it's a sizable minority, influential minority, but it's still a minority, they get alternative information, not only as far as news is concerned, but also, of course, literature, culture, and so on, because there is dissident literature, again, thriving in Russia, as you have heard from Lebedev's interview, and so on.
Yeah, because tell me a little bit about that, because that's one of the things that surprised me as I started investigating a little bit into what's happening to publishing in Russia, for instance. To what extent there is formal censorship and the levels of informal activities. And you actually prepared some slides on this. I feel it's a very academic kind of thing.
Yeah, well, please fear not. This is not going to be an academic lecture at 8 p.m. And it's going to be short anyway. But I think we can look at the very interesting issue, how to censor things when censorship is officially banned. Because in Russian constitution, there is an article, a special article that expressly forbids censorship. Never mind, censorship still exists, and very successfully so. Let's just define censorship what it is. Again, nothing academic, just an Oxford English Dictionary definition. Any regime or context in which the context of what is publicly expressed, exhibited, published, broadcast, or otherwise distributed is regulated, or in which the circulation of information is controlled. Right? So that's the most general definition, which we can be happy with. Now, the constitution that I mentioned already, Russian Federation Constitution, Article 29, paragraph number 5, says censorship shall be prohibited. And you could see that the censorship today is different from the censorship, let's say, pre-1991, late Soviet censorship, because at that time, they had this special pre-screening body all over the country, and they monitored absolutely everything before it was published or broadcast or exhibited, and that was called Glavlit. Now, in post-Soviet times, there's monitoring after the fact of selected items with a potential mass appeal. They're not really so much interested in literature anymore, the censors, right? They're mostly interested in what's going on television that people are watching in millions, and isolated books, even with extremely successful print runs, they're below the radar for the Kremlin, as it were. But there is a special ministry called the Roskomnadzor, which monitors the internet and bans certain items there. And is trying not only to ban them in Russia, but also abroad. They complain to YouTube, for example, and so on. And such a situation, self-censorship thrives. Unfortunately, it's unquantifiable, but probably does a lot of damage. What I'm going to say right now, very quickly, is just not really concentrating on books. There will be one example to do with an author of fiction, but also I'd like to say something about plays, films, and popular music concerts, okay? So we've got Reporters Without Borders in spring 2023, which is very recent. They've published the freedom of press rating, in which Russia is in the 164th place out of 180 in total. Right? You'll probably be happy to know that Norway is number one.
Still number one.
Yeah, well done. Ukraine, regardless of the war and all the war censorship that goes with it, is up in this index from 106th place to 79th place, right? The countries below Russia is Iran, Turkey, Turkmenistan, Syria, Saudi Arabia, Honduras. So there is still room further down the bottom, you know,
that's
to
why
progress.
We spoke about Iran to begin with, so we can see where Russia is heading.
Yep.
Right.
That's right. Now, my examples today are to do with Ludmila Ulitskaya, who was born in 1943. She's the first female Russian Booker Prize winner. She was vice president of the Russian Pen, so I don't know, maybe you've heard of her. She's quite well known in the West. Her latest translation into Norwegian came out in 2023. You can see the front page there. Her books are still on sale in Russia, although she's been vocally anti-war and had to emigrate as a result. She now lives in Germany. So you can see the little bit here, the red circle. Books by people like that, they haven't really been officially withdrawn from the sales, but you cannot really see the book cover. They wrap it up, and they say here, Ino Agent at the top. She's not the only one here, right? But that's her actual book, Sonichka, which was a breakthrough text that I remember reading in a literary magazine in the late 1980s. Still going strong, very popular with readers. So it says Agent, foreign agent. Although she hasn't really been officially branded foreign agent. There is a Minister of Justice that looks after this list, and this list is expanded every Friday. They add several names or organizations to it. Yeah, always on Fridays. So that's what, if you ask me, that's a part of censorship. As Mr. Lebedev said in his interview, it can boost up your sales, it's true. But, I mean, it's really denigrating to see your own book or your colleagues' books dealt with like this. My second example is from the world of theater or ballet, shall we say, and film. It's to do with Kirill Serebrennikov, who was born in 1969, so it's a different generation, same problems. A prize-winning film and theater director. He was given a conditional sentence and fine for alleged misappropriation of theater production funds in 2020. Also had to emigrate. As a result, now lives in France. So, he directed this ballet, Nureyev, about, you know, the famous dancer who escaped from the Soviet Union many years ago. died of AIDS. Obviously, it's a love story between men. There's a lot there in the script. Now the new law came out in April 2023, or rather an amendment of a previous law against the so-called Russian anti-LGBTIQ propaganda, which means that you cannot really mention anything to do with homosexual relationship or other forms of, shall we say, non-heterosexual relationship in public. Not only to the minors. When this law appeared for the first time some 10 years ago, it was only the minors that should have been protected according to this law. Now, it's just any sort of public mention is forbidden. So this successful production has been taken off the Bolshoi theater repertoire where it originally got staged. And his latest film, called Tchaikovsky's Wife, you probably know that Tchaikovsky was homosexual, but he was married. So, you know, I'm looking forward to this film. I'd like to know what was going on there. It cannot really get a license for the same reason in Russia. It was made with Russian actors, but I think its release is going to happen in France very soon. And one more example. Whoops.
See what happened now? There we go.
Oh, yeah, there we go. Which is very recent. On the 5th of May this year, a playwright and a theater director were arrested for the award-winning play Finis the Falcon, about Russian women marrying radical Islamists, under Article 205 of the Russian Federation Criminal Code, which is about justifying terrorism for up to 7 years in prison, right? So the one on your left is Svetlana Petrichuk, the playwright. The one on your right is Evgenia Berkovich, theater director. Petrichuk is shown in handcuffs. They're both in a cage. They have been arrested for 2 months. And the play was performed for the first time in 2019. It got a few prestigious Russian-wide prizes for it. And now, you know, they just harassing these women. The accusation is really ridiculous. I watched the play. It's on YouTube in a kind of reading form. It's a performance when actors are in costumes, but they read from scripts, right? So it's not a full stage production. The petition went on immediately, endorsed by the Nobel Prize winner, this journalist Dmitry Muratov. Over 12,000 signatures have been collected as of today. I've been watching it, all in the Russian-speaking world. I don't think in Norway people know about it. Maybe the Helsinki Committee does through their own channels, but I haven't really seen any information about this on the NRK or anywhere else. So it's basically despicable. Final example, they not only censor theater and books and ballet and film, and there is also a problem with rock musicians or popular music in general, maybe rap artists, hip-hop and so on. So here's an example of Noise MC. His real name is Ivan Alexeyev. He's even younger than Kirill Serebrennikov, 1985, a rap artist and a foreign agent, officially branded foreign agent last year. His concerts are being constantly banned. He's not the only one. It's just an example here, because he performed in Oslo on the 28th of April, and I went there and I listened to this performance. I even took some photos. These are mine, and I hopefully will be able to listen to a 20-second long clip from there, although I realize that, you know, it's a little bit noisy.
I'm not sure if it's in, but we'll find it. Yeah.
If not, I'll retell what's happening. So what they do, how they censor popular musicians, they target not so much them, but the venues that stage their concerts. Because the best way of making money if you're a popular musician, to go on tour. Records don't really sell anymore. You just always find a way of downloading them for free. So you go on tour, and then the venue says, sorry, we have to cancel. Fire escape problems or whatever. But what happens is that the relevant authorities contact the venue because they know the schedule ahead, and the blacklist of these popular musicians they always have in front of them as well. These blacklists have been circulating.
There is a blacklist.
There is an official blacklist. They've been published as a kind of leak from the authorities.
So an official, non-official blacklist.
Yeah, that's right. It's not been confirmed officially by the authorities, but it looks as if there are like 30 bands overall or so on that list. And the venue just isn't really brave enough because they can lose the license. They can lose their livelihood. So these musicians who go on tour from one town to another, they just discover that suddenly that quite a few of those venues in different towns refuse to host them, and that's it. So this gentleman, Noise MC, now lives in Latvia. This is a photo here from the Oslo concert in Vulkan on the 20th of April, and here's a fragment of the Oslo concert. The same concert from the song called the Swan Lake Cooperative. We mentioned Tchaikovsky today. I'd like to finish in style with Tchaikovsky as well. This is a very, very special version of Tchaikovsky. You know the little swans dance? Everyone does. But here it says the Swan Lake Cooperative. It's play on words because Putin, in his younger years, had a summer house cooperative, which he established together with his friends. When he became president, prime minister and president, these friends became very important people. They control all the financial flows, streams, and so on, and they essentially help Putin rule Russia. Not all of them are official figures, but they're extremely important for the economics, and they stuff their pockets as fast as they can, and their children as well. So this is this lake cooperative and the Swan Lake, the Tchaikovsky ballet. What we need to remember about this ballet is that at the time when Soviet leaders were buried one after another in ill health or old age, on television, on state television, there were many scenes from Swan Lake running incessantly because it was considered immodest to show something like that. To show something else. This is like no news. The country is in mourning, official mourning, and classical music fills in the news gap and entertainment programs and so on. And also on another occasion, when there was in 1991 a so-called putsch against Gorbachev, again you probably remember some of it, and he was removed from power for several days. There was no message really that the putschists could give to the Soviet people. So television has to run every waking hour, and that's what they put on, the Swan Lake.
A lot of Swan Lake.
Yeah, so the song goes pretty much, I don't know if we'll be able to play it, but that's how it goes. It goes, I'm sick and tired of what's been going on, meaning the internal situation in Russia, but also the war in Ukraine. I'm sick and tired of what's going on. I'd like to watch Swan Lake on TV. And all these Russian speakers from Oslo, Ukrainians as well, they come to this performance venue, and Noise MC makes them dance. And you have to realize that this is almost like a magic ritual. You know, music has this magical aura about it. If you do it repeatedly, maybe something that you wish for will actually happen. So that's the long and the short of it. I don't know if we can
try and press the button, and we'll see if it'll play.
Yep. Well.
Towards the computer, it's over here.
Oh, it's over there.
Oh, that's over there. Yeah. Right. It's only 20 seconds.
Let's try it.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Andrei. And that's really insightful. In closing, I wanted to ask you a couple of questions. Because what we see is now a lot of interesting and very potent art literature, music, movies, theater, ballet, being created and performed by Russians or Turkish people or Iranian people in exile. So you get this diaspora culture that we see right here in Norway. We have the free city system for writers in exile. To what extent is the culture produced by these very interesting voices in exile consumed, say, back home in Russia?
You can find a lot of it on the internet. So if you have access to YouTube as an entity isn't really banned. It is accessible in the Russian Federation. If you know what you're looking for, you can get it. Some YouTube channels are not available, but others are. It's just too big even for the Russian censors to close down. And anyway, the providers are not in Russia, so they cannot really be influenced that much. I think Noise MC is a big name, actually. He's been going across Russia on these tours. So a lot of people in provinces did listen to his songs that have always been politically, on the left, critical of the government. So until his concerts had been banned so many times that would be just counterproductive for him to stay. For this example, I think some access to a live audience Noise MC had already in the previous decade, shall we say. So it's not really a big loss. He has his fans, and they can listen online to what's going on afterwards. So it's not like under Stalin or even Brezhnev when the borders are closed and that's it. You can't really go outside. Maybe exceptionally you do, and then you bring in like a disc record by Beatles or for your children or something. It's more porous. I don't think it's possible really to censor everything that the authorities would like to censor.
No, I'm sure it wouldn't, and thankfully so. And I mean, here in PEN we work a lot on behalf of the writers and creators themselves. But something that Behruz Bouchani said at the beginning really stuck with me, and I wanted to ask if you think that's where Russia is heading. Because, yeah, of course we want to protect the rights of the creators, but what happens to the audience? Do they stop caring about the things they don't get to see? Are people giving up, or do they even care about, say, the bans on any homosexual references in art or whatever you might not be able to see? Or do you just sort of like, I can't do anything about it? Let's watch a soap opera.
Yeah, I think it's rather what you've just said. It works in any country. Out of sight, out of mind. There's hardly anything that could really be done to contravene this tendency. But it's still too early to say. We know that thousands and thousands, probably over 1 million of people, just immigrated from Russia recently. And many of them may actually come back if the situation on the front, on the Ukrainian-Russian front is resolved, if the peace is achieved by certain means, and if the war is stopped, if the government in Russia is toppled, the normal circulation will be restored. Otherwise, if it continues like this for another 3 to 5 years, I think the tendency that you've just defined to forget and to make escape in some other way, there will always be another name, there will always be another act, and you just want to forget and work inside kind of inner development, maybe learning some languages or something, I don't know, playing chess. There is always this alternative, undesirable alternative, but let's just wait and see and hope that the war will end soon.
Fingers crossed for that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it's a key to censorship. The censorship in Russia became stricter as a result of it. You just cannot ignore it. It was bad enough before, but it became even worse.
On that cheery note, we'll say thank you so much to Andrej Rogoszewski, and takk til alle dere som var med her, og håper dere synes det ble en interessant samtale. Det synes jeg. Tusen takk, og takk for i dag.